Hi, welcome to my kitchen here at Trails N62. Appreciate you stopping by. I'm going to be doing some soup today. It'll be unstuffed cabbage roll soup. So, just a note to start off with, there are no specific recommendations or guidelines or even any kind of acknowledgement from the USDA, government agencies, extension offices, ball book, or anything like that currently, today, that recommends doing any kind of pressure canning for cabbage. Now they say when you pressure can it, it loses color and intensifies in the taste. So that was studies were done back in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s. Something like that. But anyway, they haven't done any studies on it, and so they don't recommend it. So if you can cabbage soup, then you do so at your own risk. Be aware, this is not a recommended procedure. My kitchen, my rules, so I've studied this out. I think it'll work. Well, I'm pretty sure it'll work, or I wouldn't do it. So I'm going to be doing some unstuffed cabbage roll soup. I'll get that right one of these days. Alright, so that's where we're at. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be cutting up my cabbage, and I'll be browning my hamburger to go in it. And we'll get started here. First, I've got a couple of heads of cabbage. The recipe calls for 6 cups of cabbage. And I've got my recipe up here. I've got a new system here in my kitchen. I bought me a cheap laptop with an HDMI connector and connected it to my little TV in the kitchen here, so I can have my recipe up here instead of papers all over the place. Works out pretty good. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is the cabbage. Now the recipe calls for 6 cups of shredded cabbage. So I got these two here. This one's kind of, I guess it would be a medium. I don't buy a lot of cabbage. I like it, but I don't buy a lot of it. So that looks like it might be a medium one, and this one looks like it might be a small medium one. Well, that's what I'm going to start with. I'm going to see how many cups I get out of it. Hopefully I'll get the 6 cups that I need. And then we'll start browning the hamburger and the onions and that sort of thing. Okay, to get started here I have 2 pounds of ground beef. And then I cooked it up with 1.5 cups of diced onions and 1 teaspoon of minced garlic. And that's what I put in here as I browned the hamburger. I browned the hamburger and the onions together. Now this is not completely cooked, it's par cooked, maybe 3/4 cooked. I like to do my hamburger a little underdone when I can it, because it finishes cooking during the canning process. So this is probably about 3/4 cooked, maybe a little more, and then the onions were cooked with it as I cooked the hamburger, and then right at the last I put in the teaspoon of minced garlic. And then I drained it in a strainer and run hot water over it a little at a time to drain off some more of the grease. Now next, I'm going to put in 8 cups of beef broth. Sorry, I kind of turned away when I did that. 8 cups of beef broth. I'm going to put in here. Alright, just a little insert here into the video, the recipe. I did have one of my unstuffed cabbage roll soups, and it was good, tasted good and everything. I found that for me, the soup might have been a little bit thin. The liquid part of it might have been a little bit thin. So after looking at it and everything, I'm thinking that maybe next time I make it, I'm going to substitute about half of the beef broth for tomato juice. And that'll thicken up the soup just a little bit, just enough so there's a little more substance to it, so to speak. So that's just my idea. I thought I'd put this in here. Next time I make it, I think I'm going to do a half and half tomato juice and the beef broth. we'll see how that goes. Just a little information for you there. Now, back to your regularly scheduled video. And 2 quarts of diced tomatoes with the juice. Next, we're going to put in 1 cup of green peppers chopped. One cup of chopped mushrooms. These are some that I canned. And a little extra that I put in mine that wasn't in the actual recipe is some water chestnuts. So I've got an 8-ounce can of water chestnuts that I put in here. You can also put some bamboo shoots in here if you like those. Six cups of chopped cabbage. Now, I had those 2 heads. I just did 1, and actually it made quite a bit of chopped cabbage. So I put in a little extra cabbage, put in a little extra beef broth. I did that because I think this recipe is for 7 quarts and I want to do 8 quarts. So I put in a little extra of that to beef it up a little bit. But as you can see here, this is the cabbage that I had left over. So I probably got another 6 cups on that 1 head of cabbage. I'm going to put in 1 cup of chopped celery. And we're going to mix all this up. Once we have our vegetables and beef all mixed up together, we've got our heat turned on. We're going to put in our spices. And here's what I added on spices. Now remember, on spices you can change this if you want to. You don't have to add as much. You can add a little less. It doesn't have to be exact on the spices. You can spice it up as you heat it up a lot easier than you can take the spices out. So the recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, which you know, if you don't like that much garlic, cut it down. You don't have, because we already have minced garlic in here. But 2 tablespoons of garlic powder. It calls for 2 teaspoons of lemon pepper, 1 tablespoon of dried parsley, 2 tablespoons of dried basil, 1 tablespoon dried oregano, 1 teaspoon of dry celery. Now I used a powdered celery seed was what I used. Now it also calls for 2 teaspoons of salt. It says canning salt, but you're not worried about the coloration of it, so regular salt, whatever kind of salt you want to use. I didn't put any salt in it because my beef broth was salty. So I will salt it as I eat it if I need more salt. And I've just mixed all that together, and I will put it all in. Mix it up as it's heating up. We'll get all. Now that we've got everything mixed up in here good, we're going to bring this up to just a simmer, and then we're going to cook. We're going to let it cook on medium low for 30 minutes. But first, we're going to bring it up to just a simmer, so it's good and hot. And don't boil it; just bring it up to a simmer. And then we're going to let it cook for about 30 minutes on medium-low heat. When I cooked this, I'm not sure if I was really clear, so let me be clear on how I cooked this. I started heating it up as I was putting the stuff in, and when I got it all in, mixed it up, I turned it up on high. It might have already been on high, but it was on high. I set my timer for 30 minutes and heated it up on high until it got to a simmer, not boiling it, but just a hot simmer, and then I turned it down on low, medium, or medium-low, and finished out the 30 minutes that way. So it's cooked up a little bit, which is good because that's the way it's supposed to be. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to use a strainer spoon, and I'm going to put about half solid in these. So I'm just going to strain it to solid. Now there'll be some liquid in there, of course, but I'm going to put these half full of solids, more or less. Once we get these half full of solids, and of course there's going to be some liquid in there, but I just kind of even it out so there's proportionally solid to liquid is what I'm looking for. So with half of our solid in there, the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to take this out and we're just going to put liquid in. We'll fill these up to our 1-inch head space. Now once they're filled, then we're going to debubble. Doesn't take a lot because it's a soup, but we did put the solids in first. So we are going to debubble it, stir it around a little bit, make sure we get all the air pockets out. Once we debubble, we wipe our rims with vinegar. We'll make sure nothing's on there that will stop the sealing process. Clean them off with vinegar. We'll put the rest of our vinegar in our canner because we have hard water. As you may have noticed, I have one wide mouth, the rest are regular mouth. And that's mainly because I like to use all the same when I do things, but that's mainly because I couldn't find any more regular mouth quarts. I've got some, I just they weren't where I thought they were, so I went with the one wide mouth. Now you can do this, I do it in quarts. I've done some of my soups in 1.5 pints, which I like, but I'm doing these in quarts instead of pints, mainly because I like my soup just soup. I don't eat much of anything with my soup. I rarely have crackers or anything. I just eat soup. So I like quite a bit of it. And while I might not eat a whole quart, I'll make sure I have enough. The recipe is the same if you're doing pints, 1.5 pints, or quarts. Because you're making the soup up and then putting it into the jars, so it doesn't matter what you use except when it comes to the canning process. The canning process, pints will be for 75 minutes because we have meat in here. Quarts will be for 90 minutes. I've got my 15-pound weight on top for my altitude. It's set on exhaust. Plugged in, set it on high, "90 minutes for quarts," and there she goes. Alright, looks like we have 8 quarts of unstuffed cabbage roll soup, and turned out pretty good. A lot of good looking stuff in there. They're all sealed, which is great. Had no problems with the sealing. 8 quarts of unstuffed cabbage roll soup. So the soup turned out great. It looks good. I really like it. One of the things I did notice that it did make 8 quarts. I probably could have evened out the solids in it a little better. I think the first batch I did maybe just a little less than half, and I could have went ahead and put it all the way up to the half, because the second batch there was a little bit more solid in it than the first one. So I could have even up the solid a little bit more, but that's okay. The other thing I noticed when I took these out, and you will notice this when you do things like this, especially soups, is that when you first take these out, you will find your solids will all float to the top, and then towards the bottom and just be mostly liquid. That's normal, so don't get all out of shape over it. It's normal, and as you can see, as they cooled, it all came back together with the liquid and solid mix. So just so you know. The other thing is, I had a little bit of seepage. The water in my canner was discolored a little bit. There was a little bit of the liquid had come out. Now, there's a difference between seepage. Well, I call it seepage. It's actually when the product inside the jar gets hot and starts boiling under the heat and pressure, you will have something that will boil up. Mostly that'll be the clear liquid or the real liquid part, and it'll come out, and the processing of it, when it starts to seal and cools down, you generally won't have a problem with the sealing. That's okay. Sometimes it doesn't, especially if you don't have enough headspace in there and you've got more solid up towards the top, and it will wedge between the lid and the jar rim, and that will cause them not to seal. The other thing is siphoning, and a lot of people call the seepage siphoning. Siphoning is actually when you have a sudden difference in the pressure outside the jars than you have inside the jars, and causes the inside to pressure out, and that brings up more solids, which gives you more of a chance of unsealed jars. That's caused by releasing the pressure too early in the canner. That's why you leave it set. Once it's done, once it's finished, you don't take the weight off, you leave it set, you let it cool down naturally so that the pressure is equally released inside the jars as outside the jars, and it'll eventually level out. And that's why you let it set. You don't take the weight off, you don't let that steam out fast, because that makes a sudden decrease in pressure on the outside, which causes siphoning. Till next time, thanks for watching. Appreciate your subscribing. From my house to your house, from my kitchen to your kitchen. God bless.